Good morning, everyone. I am Eleonora Lamm. I am a consultant of bioethics and ethics of science at the UNESCO Montevideo, and I'd like to welcome you all, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today in this interesting roundtable. It is a big honor for me to moderate this excellent roundtable today, and especially I have the special honor to introduce Your Excellency Altai Dengisaj, the President of the General Conference of UNESCO, who will make an opening speech for this second day. Your Excellency, thank you for being here. You have the floor. Your Excellency, can you hear me?
This is better now. You can hear me, I think, and you can see me. Is that? Vous pourriez me voir et aussi m'écouter?
We can hear you, yes. We cannot see you yet, but...
Yeah, anyway, maybe during the allocution.
Perfect. Now we can see you and it's perfect.
Okay,
thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And I now speak.
Yes, you have the floor.
Merci. Mrs. Assistant Director General, esteemed guests, je suis aussi francophone, mais je suis beaucoup plus confortable en anglais. Permettez-moi de parler en anglais, s'il vous plaît. Donc, je vous remercie. I'm very happy to be able to address you on the second day of this wonderful event. I regard World Philosophy Day as one of our most important events, which lies at the heart of UNESCO's mandate. I sincerely thank Assistant Director General Madame Gabriela Ramos for inviting me and giving this real opportunity to address this very special gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, the longest running dream of humanity is not to reach equality, but to see a philosopher king. The longest running question is not about whether essence precedes existence or vice versa, but it is about how we are going to affirm life in the best possible way in each circumstance. How good thinking and a cultivated world outlook can help us to sustain a good life. We are passing through a time where individuals and societies everywhere do not enjoy the empowerment of philosophy and humanities. Otherwise, how are we going to explain why we are living increasingly in polarized societies? Everyone is watching his own TV channel, reading his own newspaper, be friends with only those who think like him, and end up living in the same neighborhoods. Why is it that the so-called silo thinking gains so much power in shaping what we think? Why we are witnessing a rise in all kinds of radicalism? Why are we having failing health systems everywhere, and this even before the pandemic? Why was it so difficult for us to curb our excesses? What about the so-called cookies and advertisements which do not allow us a decent reading in the internet? Hundreds of questions come to mind on how we are in fact sabotaging our own achievements. And one last question. How did we commemorate the 250th anniversary of Beethoven? Yes, the factor of pandemics, of course. Yet, don't you think it would have been quite different if we had to commemorate it, say, 25 years ago? There is a common membrane, common thread that connects all these phenomena. It is the decline of humanities, unfortunate decline of humanities and studies. It is also the consequent absolute authority of the algorithms. For some time now, we have been encountering critical minds less and less. I do not dispute we owe so much to science. We will always need law. Yet we all know that only humanities enrich the individual in unique ways. It is philosophy and humanities that give us the vigor in front of life. Furthermore, we have to keep in mind that our contemporary societies have built-in vulnerabilities and complex interdependencies. Paradoxically, they could allow things to go very badly. Complexity grows by small steps, each of which seems reasonable at the time. We do not notice how fragile it is becoming. Then some little push arrives, and the world starts to fall apart. And we start wondering how we got there. How are we going to monitor such processes? How are we going to measure where we are? Here again, we need humanities because the processes are not only complex, but also multi-layered and multi-dimensional. Only humanities can enable us to have better systemic thinking. The process of change has a tendency to change gradually first, and then all at once. We have seen that. Apparently, we have a broken engagement with philosophy and humanities, and we have to re-engage. Apparently, philosophy and humanities should finally outmaneuver something. What is this that we have to outmaneuver? This is the central question of today. I do not see any way out unless we establish blanket humanities courses, obligatory courses that is, at either the first year or the second year at the universities. I know that seems to be a long shot, but until then, we have to start this revitalization. In this respect, UNESCO's work will be very important. It is very important. We have to find ways how we can support more, fund better, and appreciate more our social and human sciences department. In this quest, ADG Mrs. Gabriela Ramos has a critical role, and I thank her heartily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your interesting, eloquent, and extraordinary words and comments. Now, I will introduce the roundtable. We are here today to commemorate the World Philosophy Day, as His Excellency said. The World Philosophy Day is annually observed on the third Thursday of November to honor philosophical reflections around the world. It is a day for people to share thoughts, openly explore and discuss new ideas, and inspire public debate on society's challenges. Today, we will be sharing the third roundtable on health and philosophical issue, and we are honored to have brilliant speakers with us. The very old question of what health consists of, which has occupied philosophers since antiquity, takes a new face in the face of a pandemic which, much more than a plague of the Fontaine, affects everyone, including those it doesn't affect. But it doesn't affect all equally. Thinking about health at the level of society poses essential questions of inequalities and fractures. That is why we need to illuminate us with some reflections of the topic. Regarding the methodology of our meeting, every panelist will have 15 minutes for his or her presentation. Then each presentation will be followed by a 15-minute questions and answers session. We will be welcoming questions from the audience. We may leave your questions or comments via the chat line, and I will introduce the questions in the discussion later. I am pleased to introduce today's great speakers, who are Bjorn, Morten, Hofman, Luis de Miranda, and Paulina Rivero Weber. Now I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker, Bjorn Morten Hofman, and then we will have the questions and answers later on. Bjorn is a professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology at the Jobbik and adjunct professor at the Center for Medical Ethics at the University of Oslo. He holds a PhD in philosophy of medicine and is trained both in the natural sciences and in the humanities. His main research interests are philosophy of medicine, philosophy of science, technology assessment, and bioethics. He has been a researcher at the Norwegian Knowledge Center for the Health Services and a Harkness Fellow at the Dartmouth College. Bjorn, thank you very much for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to reflect on the concept of health. So health is a philosophical issue. The subtitle is Reflections on the Concept of Health in Times of Pandemics. And of course, these are very, very special times, and philosophy has a lot to contribute to reflect on this issue, both ethically with regards to issues of justice, but also epistemically with regards to how can we classify this condition which we face with. I will concentrate much more on the conceptual issues. I hope others will address the ethical and epistemic issues with regards to this. So the cases that we have observed worldwide, severe diseases with regards to COVID-19, there's no really hard question there. There is no health in these cases. We have obvious diseases, so we're not that challenged philosophically in these cases. But we have a lot of, and we experience that, a lot of cases where there are no symptoms. And the question, the very old ancient question comes, is this health or disease? And how can we classify them as health or disease? And how should we do that? That becomes an urgent question with regards to handling situations like this. And also, does the contagiousness matter whether we consider the conditions of persons as health or disease, whether they are contagion or not? Another question, tremendously important, also practically, not only philosophically, is of course, will you become ill if you have, for instance, a specific positive test? Yet another question is, how ill will you become? And of course, this relates to the more fundamental issue of whether it counts as health or disease. So the challenge can be charted out in the following way, of course. If we look at other conditions like Ebola, you will probably become ill, so it's likely that you will become ill. And also it's likely that you will become very ill, and it is very contagious. So that's an easy case. Various viruses cause influenza, and of course it's maybe quite likely that you will become ill. The illness you will experience may be moderate, and the contagiousness may be also moderate. The challenge that we face now is that while the contagiousness of the SARS-CoV-2 virus is that it's very contagious, the question with regards to will you become ill and how ill you will become very much depends on age and other factors which we do not yet know. So there are some basic challenges here also with regards to the concept of health and disease. And if we put severity on one axis, likelihood on the other axis, and contagiousness on the third, we will place Ebola very high up. The challenge that we face now is, of course, that the SARS-CoV-2 is in a way all over the place. And of course, sorry, Also, it challenges us because it comes into areas which we ordinary or normally classify as health. So how should we handle this situation conceptually? That's the basic question we're facing. So the key questions more specifically are you healthy if you're infected but have no symptoms? Does it matter whether you are infectious? Does it matter how likely it is that you will experience disease? And does it matter how severely you will experience disease? So these are some of the basic challenges which come out of the present situation, and which both challenges philosophy, but also where philosophy can contribute. So if you have cases with strong symptoms and clear signs, there are no problems. We classify them as diseases and people experience illness. Also, cases with clear signs and mild symptoms are classified as diseases. If there are no signs, we say, well, the person is ill. We don't know whether there is a disease. And if you have clear signs and no symptoms, well, there may be a potential disease. But the challenge is, of course, then what about the case where we have no symptoms and no signs? So a lot of people now are in this situation. And the question is, what and how should we categorize these? And of course, how should we address the issue and how should we handle them? So this also relates to whether people are infected or not. So if you have strong symptoms and you are infected, of course, there is a clear case of disease. Even if the symptoms are mild, if there is an infection, we say that persons are all diseased. But the interesting thing is, if you have no symptoms and are affected, you are at risk and you are potentially contagious. So adding the dimension of contagiousness is interesting, because then you're at the situation where you, with strong symptoms, are diseased, with mild symptoms are diseased, with no symptoms but both being infected and being infectious, you're at risk of having the disease yourself. But there's an additional point, and that is that you may spread the virus to others. And that challenges us with regards to, well, are you then diseased or not? Given the three dimensions ordinarily reflected upon with regards to human malady, illness, sickness, disease, this places us in a very special situation. Illness is the experience the person has. Disease is what is classified by the professionals and what is given by signs and markers. And sickness is the sick role, i.e. what persons are considered to be by society. The situation we have now is, of course, where should we place persons in this scheme? And of course, the interesting thing is that there's, of course, an overlap between health and disease. And in this overlap, we are used to handle individual health risk, where people may not have symptoms, but they still may be at risk of becoming diseased. But the interesting thing in the situation we have now is that the health risk is not to ourselves, but also to others. So we're challenged in a way in this situation. So if we use the opportunity to look to theories of health to address this issue, it's quite interesting to see that some of the theories we have are quite helpful in this matter. The balance theory, which we have from antiquity, where health is being in balance, may be interesting, but may not be that useful. Because if you are infected but have no symptoms or even infectious, you may be in balance, but there is something special with you, for instance, that you're able to infect others. the concept of health as a margin or resilience or slack is much more interesting, because this is a way of understanding health which fits more properly to the situation that we face with now. And also health as the ability to adapt makes sense to us. Also maybe together with the situation or the conception of health as enigma, explained by Hans-Georg Gadamer. So these three ways of looking at health can be very useful for us to understand the situation that we are in. But also the situation can challenge and make us refine these ways to look at health. Of course, it's very the meaning theory of health, or various types of theories of health looking at meaning, are very important, because we are so challenged as individuals, but also societies today. Function theory may be relevant for the severe cases. Happiness theories are also interesting. But looking at theories that influence people's lives, it's very important to see how the situation we are in now affects people's ability to act, to interact with each other, their happiness, their flourishing, but also the way people are comfortable in their own homes, or whether they feel home-like in the situation that they are situated in. So we can see that various types of theories of health, which we have all the way from antiquity, can be more or less helpful in the situation. And at the same time, that the situation we are in can be used to refine these theories. So in pandemics with infectious disease and epidemics, they can reveal how dependent each individual and individual's health is on other persons. I think that's one of the important lessons that we have learned from this situation, but also show how basic and important health is, and how much we're willing to sacrifice for health. I think the situation also illustrates how different theories of health can help and understand various situations, conditions, and the aspects of an epidemic or a pandemic. And also the situation reminds of inequalities of health and disease in our societies. And this brings me to the very end, and I want to close with Plato's words in Gorgias, who says, "Certainly he will answer, for is not health the greatest good? What greater good can men have, Socrates? What is better than health?" And we're certainly reminded of this in these times. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, for your informative and interesting speech, and especially because you have highlighted all the uncertainties of this illness that is affecting us today. It was really insightful, important, and clarifying. You have highlighted all the cardinal points. You definitely made an input. Now the questions and answer session is open. I will take questions from the chat box, if there is any. We invite all the audience to leave their questions in the chat box. Now we have one here. I'm gonna, well, they are thanking you. Everyone is saying that it's really interesting, and they are congratulating you. Probably we can take some minutes, just 1 or 2 minutes, to see if there is any question. If not, well, we go on to the next one, and probably people are too shy at this moment. Well, here we have one question from Adam Selamnia. He asked, is health a distributed good across the community of humans?
Yes. So if I read the question right, to what extent? No, maybe you should repeat the question, because I read another question. Sorry.
He's asking if health a distributed good across the community of humans?
Well, it is distributed, but the challenge is, of course, that it's not equally distributed. And of course, the inequalities that we see are maybe enlarged in this situation which we are in now. So it highlights the ethical issue with regards to justice and inequality with regards to health. So the pandemic is enhancing a challenge which we have already, an ethical challenge with regards to distributing health in an equal manner.
Exactly. Here we have another one related to the one I made before. Racy asked, to what extent state of good health should remain a personal decision and not a social one? I think it is a really interesting question.
Excellent, an important, very, very important question. Of course, individual responsibility for health has been in the focus for many years, but of course, as we well know, the determinants of health are very much out of the reach of the individual. Of course, it also has to be a common good, and also because which we now realize much more than before, maybe, that our interaction is so important for people's health. So we really have to work not only for our own health, but also for others' health, because both our own health and others' health depends so much on our own action and the action of communities.
Here there is another interesting question from Camilo Barón Cifuentes. He's asking, if do you have known an example on the case of philosophers about some virus known before? Does it exist before in the history of humanity, registered in the books?
I'm not quite sure if I got the question, because there are so many viruses and so many plagues and pandemics historically. So I'm not quite sure whether the question is with regards to these. And we certainly know that some of the plagues we've experienced are able to eradicate large proportions of the population. So could you maybe clarify the question?
Juan Camilo, if you can clarify your question, probably we can ask Bjorn in order to be clear. I think he's asking if there's been another crisis like this, another virus like this, which affects all the humanity and not only
a smaller proportion. Well, there probably have been. I mean, the Spanish flu has been discussed extensively and compared, and of course, we're still to see how this ends. So the extension, and of course, it's always important to look at the history to see for examples, but it's maybe hard to compare also because the communication, the ways of communication and spreading diseases now is much stronger. So you can have milder cases historically, which of course were not that severe in terms of number of deaths, but the way we communicate and commute today makes it much more dangerous.
Exactly. Yes, you're right. Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. Here we have a very straight question. Francesco Folio asks, in which sense COVID-19 is a philosophical problem?
That's a good and interesting question. I think COVID-19 is a practical question. We need to help people, and we need to find ways to handle it. But there are, in answering how should we help people in the most efficient way, there are so many issues that are related to philosophical topics. For instance, how infectious is the disease? How should we classify it? How should we test it? How should we define it? How should we validate our tests are related to philosophical issues, epistemic issues? And of course, the issue of justice is related to an equality of treatment, access to vaccines and things like that are related to the ethical issues. And of course, there are ontological issues as well. What are these viruses as such, and how should we understand them, and what happens if they mutate, and how should we then classify them? So there are both ontological issues, there are ethical issues, and there are, as I tried to highlight, some conceptual issues. And all these issues are important in order to address the pandemic and the condition in a practical way.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. Here we have another one. At the beginning, they were really shy, and now they are asking a lot. So you have many questions. Do you not think that the concept of health is related to sociological concepts and the like, apart from the philosophical field?
Related to what in the sociological field? I like what? No.
I am reading that again. Probably he steps some, he leaves some words, something like that. Do you not think that the concept of health is related to sociological concepts and the like?
And the like. Okay. Yes. Well, of course. Yes. In sociology, the concept of sickness has been very much highlighted, and of course, the opposite of sickness is various types of well-being. There's been many ways to try to classify health. Also in terms of well-being and happiness in various forms. And of course, that is really a challenge, because to define happiness, if you think that health is the same as happiness in some way, we have the burden of trying to define happiness. And we've tried to do that for quite some years, historically and philosophically. And well, we may have some good solutions on the way, but there's no definite answer and conclusive answer to the question of what is happiness, if health is happiness. So I think we will struggle with that also for many years to come. But the case of the pandemic has shown us that well, the borders between health and disease may not be as clear as we want to, and also to try to get out of situations like this, we have to be very careful with regards to what is our aim, what's the goal, and the goal is for many purposes health, and then we have to be clear and clarify what health is.
Perfect, thank you very much. Here, Clarence is asking if it is important to also consider the role of attitudes in fostering conditions of health and disease on the collective level.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, the sound is not good.
Of course. Don't worry. Probably my pronunciation is not as good as you may expect. It is important to also consider the role of attitudes in fostering conditions of health and disease on the collective level. Sorry.
Yes, that's a good point. So our attitudes towards health, but also towards others, is very, very important. And one of the things we have seen, and which is quite worrisome, is of course that the attitudes has, well, at least in some parts of the pandemic, has been very protective with regards to trying to protect the own population and not looking at a more global perspective. So we definitely have to pay attention also to the attitudes with regards to health, and also I think realizing, as I indicated before, that this is very much an interdependent problem, an interconnected problem. We are in this together, and we need to help not only ourselves, but also other people in the situation. And we have to look at it as a global and not a local or national problem.
Perfect. And well, I'm going to ask you the last one, which is a big one, I think. So do you have a reference about the theories of the unknown, or maybe the impossible of the understanding? Do you agree it can be related with the concept of the illness? I remember the reference of Nietzsche or Schopenhauer.
I'm not quite sure if it was... is the question with regards to a specific reference to Nietzsche or Schopenhauer, or what was your question? Could you please repeat?
Of course. Do you have a reference about the theories of the unknown or maybe the impossible of the understanding? Do you agree it can be related with the concept of illness? I remind the reference of Nietzsche or Schopenhauer. The question is related to the reference about the theories of the unknown or maybe the impossible of understanding, and he's relating to the theories of Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. This is my interpretation.
Yes. Well, I think to both to the known and to the unknown, and it can also be related to Hans-Georg Gadamer, who wrote about the enigma of health, because health in several theories has been classified as something we take for granted. We take it for granted and we don't really know. It's hard to grasp what it is, and of course several philosophers have addressed this. And the point is that when health vanishes, we're able to understand what it is because we lack it. The special thing with the situation we are in now is that a lot of people are still healthy, but they still feel that their way of life is restricted. So we're in a very special situation where we can't say that we're ill, but in a way we're still threatened. So we have the opportunity now to study health, even if it's considered to be something enigmatic or non-known or very hard to classify or to grasp. So I think this situation gives us a very, very special opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answering all the questions with such a clarity, and thank you, really. Now we leave you for a few minutes, and we leave you in peace for a few minutes, Bjorn, and we move on to the next panelist. And now I will introduce Luis de Miranda. Luis is an international philosopher and author of non-fiction and fiction. His books, Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, or his novel, Who Killed the Poet, has been translated into 10 languages. Being a Neoness was published by MIT Press in 2019 and Ensemblance by Edinburgh University Press in 2020. Luis de Miranda is an affiliate researcher at the University of Rivero in Sweden. There he initiated the CREA group, which is a cross-disciplinary research on effectual anticipation. And from January 2021, Luis will move to Uppsala University to do research and teaching at the new Center of Medical Humanities in the Department of History of Sciences and Ideas. And we wish him the best of luck in this new challenge. Luis, thank you very much for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you. So, I'll try to start with reminding us that we are celebrating philosophy, which is sometimes considered as something old. And in fact, philosophy is new, and I would even say that it's twice new. It is new because if we look at the evolution of life and the evolution of humanity, it is not so long ago that we have reached this paradigm in which we are capable of thinking about the whole in ways that can be shared, evaluated, discussed, and not only in terms of faith or dogma. But more interestingly, for our question of health, I think that philosophy is new in the sense that there is something that can be called philosophical health. And this is what I will try to do in the next 15 minutes, is explain what do I mean by philosophical health. We usually know what is physical health. We know what is mental health. At least there is, although there are many debates about it, there is a field, there is an institutional field called mental health. But when we go back in time, not so long ago, in fact, both physical health and psychological health were a luxury for the happy few at the beginning of the 20th century. Very few people had access to psychoanalysis, for example, or to systematic training of the body or diet. And my view is that philosophical health, which has been since the ancient Greeks a privilege for the happy few, can be now democratized, and hopefully by the end of this century, we might engage with the idea of philosophical health in a way that is beneficial for the entire society globally. So the contribution I'd like to make is to present what I think are 5 values representative of philosophical health, or 5 ideals. And the first one is mental heroism. And you will see that everything, these 5 principles are in fact known since the ancient Greeks. And I will be following here several analyses that have been presented first and foremost by Pierre Hadot in his rereading of philosophy as a way of life rather than a pure abstract ivory tower endeavor. And also Foucault in his studies of the care of the self or of the soul. So indeed, it takes extreme courage to think as independently as possible. And this has been a thread all over the history of philosophy. We find it not only with the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, but also with Kant, who proposed actually 3 maxims in his Anthropology for practical wisdom, what he called practical wisdom. And those maxims are: think for yourself, think into the place of the other in communication with human beings, and always think consistently with yourself. So here we see already that mental heroism is not only about being able to resist resiliently the influences of the opinion, the fears, the collective fears, of which we do have an example today, for example. It is also being capable of intellectual empathy, which is something quite different from emotional empathy. But more importantly, mental heroism is about a coherence between what we think, our beliefs, our system of values, our worldview, and what we do. And in this sense, it is not only a world of ideals, but it has to do with orientation in life. And that's the second principle, deep orientation. It's not only about having courage, it is also about discovering what is our path, what is our way, and trying to be faithful to our highest values, whether those values may be truth, honesty, or justice, for example. And what philosophy has been arguing since the ancient Greeks is that when we follow a deep orientation, which starts with ideation indeed, it has an incidence into our social life, into reality. There is a correspondence between ideas and acts, and ideas are social forces. Therefore, our ideas are embedded in a network of responsibility. So, of course, this is closely tied to the notions of human flourishing, by which individuals aspire to free themselves from uncontrolled beliefs, automatic fears, bellicose impulses, dogmas, or lack of mastery over their personal destination. Now, this has to do with the fact that philosophy is ideally not dogmatic in the sense that it doesn't pretend to know what the truth here, and the figure here, of course, is Socrates. It is philosophy, it is a love of wisdom as an ideal that is a dialectic ideal, that is an idea that allows for creativity and critique, respectful critique. And that's the third principle, critical creativity. So here it's important because in critical, we have the Greek root crisis, krisis. And I was born in 71, and since then, I've always heard that we've been in crisis. So for my generation, it's just crisis after crisis, according, of course, to the media or other mainstream readings. But we have forgotten that krisis in Greek, doesn't mean crisis in the sense that we have it now, catastrophe. It means judgment. It means the capacity to discriminate from wanted elements from unwanted material. And it was used by doctors, actually, in the medical realm, in order to designate the moment, the critical moment where a condition might evolve for better or worse. And why do I connect critique with creativity? Well, because the ideal of philosophical health suggests a durably resilient and regular capacity for recreative transformations of critical situations. And in physiology, for example, today, some researchers are talking about not only homeostasis, this sort of equilibrium to which a body would return, but about hyperstasis, about the capacity to create new equilibriums. And we see that in life. And of course, we see that in mind. It is possible for our societies and for our being in the world to create new equilibriums and not always to come back conservatively to old ways. The fourth principle, which is, of course, articulated with the others, there is no sense that the first was higher than the fourth. It's like a circle of capacities, is what I call deep listening. And this seems quite self-evident. And yet we do it so rarely. Philosophy, again, since the beginning, has been concerned with dialogue and being consonant with the other, with nature and with truth. And that's Kant's second principle, the capacity not only to hold to our truth, but also to have intellectual empathy for other possible truth in a context where philo is more important than Sophie. Friendship in interrogating the world is more important than affirming one dogma over another. And when we speak of listening, of course, here comes the concept that we touched upon in the questions previously, the idea of the unheard of, the openness to hear the singularity not only of each human being, but also of life itself. Careful listening bears fruits because everything in the universe is interlaced. And that's not a dogma, that's a very logical position of philosophy. Philosophy is the interrogation of the whole. Philosophy, more precisely, is the care for the whole. In everything that we do we care for the whole? We get sometimes so focused in producing money or producing a specific, very detailed kind of technology, and we forget the whole. And I think one of the aspects of I think the positive aspect of what is happening this year is that suddenly we think of the whole. Of course, we think of the whole sometimes in a reduced manner. We think of our nation. Some people go further, they think about the world, and some people may even go further and have a cosmological care of the whole. And that vigilance, again, that this listening was also present in ancient philosophy in terms of vigilance and presence of mind, and care for what they called physis, which was nature, in the sense that nature is absolute possibility. And that's the fifth principle and last principle. Absolute possibility. So by absolute possibility, of course, it is not meant this technological neoliberal idea that technology will solve everything, that the sky is the limit. In terms of philosophical health, absolute possibility is an a priori intuitive feeling that the source of being, what Aristotle called primum mobile, and what Plotinus called the one, that is absolute possibility that gets actualized in a matter or another locally. And the ways we actualize absolute possibility in co-creation with life, those ways are always contingent. And there, of course, that's where philosophy touches the political. There is not a necessary way of making a world. There are many ways of making a world. And we can interrogate, therefore, through critical creativity, the way our world is now made. Right, so I will finish and conclude by saying that philosophy is a care for the whole, in the sense that that whole is a creative flux. And in that sense, while we often hear the injunction to get real, as if realism was the way history has been evolving, it is not. History is, all the progresses in history are not made by realist people. They are made by what I would call crealist people, people who actually prefer to get creal, people who never forget the impossible, the unheard of, and people who are sometimes castigated and criticized for looking at that impossible and desiring it to become real, while the realists are telling them, no, look at the numbers, look at the statistics, and look at all the reification that we are presenting as necessary, and which, as we have seen, is not. So I'll conclude by that. I think that philosophers who are a group that is expanding, of course, there's no privilege to think, but they are a new aspect of being in the world. And in that sense, we can all start to practice more so that we have in the past, philosophical health as something that will come as a complement to physical health and psychological health.
With the audio? Okay, thank you very much, Luis. Thank you, really, for your excellent and critical thoughts. You went directly to the essential point, I think, and it was great and brilliant. Thank you again for your profound and meaningful speech. Now I'd like to invite the audience to make their comments and questions to our speaker, and also I may invite the other speakers to ask questions. You can ask questions each other between you. Thank you, Luis. We have one question from Russia, and the first one. First, Sophia is thanking you. She says, for food and for thought and call to mental action. And she's asking if are not the principles that you have suggested, kind of intellectual virtues first outlined by Aristotle, now being revised.
Exactly, and I mentioned, so I wouldn't say Aristotle's only. I would say that from Plato to the Stoics and of course Aristotle's, there is much in ancient philosophy that, as I said, has not yet been actualized in society yet. It is still considered as something that it's nice, it's a nice training for the mind, but, and of course there are attempts to apply it more so in the last 20 years. But I think the project is still open for society to integrate philosophical health. When I started studying philosophy, it was actually considered almost a disease to study philosophy in the early 90s. My God, you will be out of a job. You are totally disconnected from real life. All the cliches about philosophy. And I think this is starting to slowly change now, but the biggest changes are ahead of us. And for example, one of the practices I have along with my research is that I do philosophical counseling with individuals, and I help them reflect about their worldview and engagement in life. And I think we could generalize this practice of philosophical care in many aspects of life. I am starting, for example, to work with a doctor who's a specialist in spinal cord injury. And we have the individuals who are suddenly, their life is transformed in the sense that suddenly they, their domain of possibilities in terms of moving is extremely reduced, yet their mind is functioning perfectly. So they have to redefine their life, and their way of doing it is through philosophical care.
Thank you very much. We have another question. Well, he's thanking you, and he's asking just a question on one of our last points of your very last point. Sorry, could we imagine a Nietzsche without his illness?
That's a very interesting question, and indeed Nietzsche had that concept of great health, which is somehow related with some of the principles I've been exposing. I think, despite the romanticism about the fact that it is through overcoming his condition, continuous headaches, and other forms of impairment that Nietzsche had, there is this romantic view that he was a great thinker because he could overcome that. And in a way, if he didn't have that impairments, perhaps he would have simply have been a little bit more lazy. In life, more in existence, it's true that sometimes, and coming back to the conversations I have regarding patients who have spinal cord injury, it is true that sometimes it is through an accident that we wake up from a form of life that might have been immature. And now what philosophical health would do is that precisely we don't need to have an accident or to get as sick as Nietzsche had to be philosophically healthy. It can be something that can be democratized and developed by anticipation, right? I know there is this cliche about philosophizing as something that we do when everything goes wrong. And I would like philosophizing to be something that we do also as everything goes well.
Thank you very much, Luis. We have a question from Pedro Gomez. He says, truth isn't always a major scope of philosophy, and not the fear, disgust under a pseudo value under a false pandemic.
Right. I mean, I haven't read the question, but I think I understand that he means that there is a consensus today on the pandemic. And indeed, philosophers are very suspicious of actually, I was going to say they're suspicious of pandemics. Well, they're suspicious of consensus, because consensus itself is the biggest pandemic. The contagion of ideas is the first pandemic, and this has been going on forever. So it would be interesting, and I live in Sweden, and I thought that was the way Sweden was following. It is to give people the responsibility rather than impose biopolitics and authoritarian rules on them. And I thought this was very healthy. Unfortunately, Sweden has been pressured by the dominant opinion, which is very anxiogenic, and is now introducing itself more stringent rules, which are still not obligatory, right? But I think that indeed, philosophical health would allow people collectively to be less controlled by their fears, ideologies, or means of interpretation that might prevent the freedom of thought.
Thank you very much, Luis. Another question from Sofia from Russia. First of all, she's thanking you for the answer, and she has another question. What makes you so optimistic about spreading this philosophical health in the population? The modern world actually resists it.
It is true that sometimes we may have the impression that we live in an anti-intellectual world where emotionalism dominates. Yet, through my practice of philosophical counseling, I have discovered through my great gratitude that much more of us than we think are willing to consider that to think is as important as it is to breathe. And the traditional separation that we made, for example, between emotions and thinking is fallacious. I mean, we know that thinking is also a feeling through intuition, for example. So I'm optimistic because I've experienced in my life that every time that I have applied those principles, although I might have done it in a way that was not as explicit as now, but it was worth it. So to all the people who are philosophically oriented and sometimes might fall into some despair that, my God, this world is really anti-intellectual, and sometimes it feels like intellectuals are the persecuted minority of which we talk the less. To these people, I would say it's worth it. It's worth it because it's healthy, and that balance between physical, psychological, and philosophical health is the way to go.
I like your optimism and I admire it. I have to say, thank you very much. Here we have a question from Jim Pang. Could Luis, could you please explain a bit more about the relation between the absolute possibility and Aristotle's concept of the one?
Right. So the concept of the one is more present in Plotinus and Plato. So I would like to say two things. The first thing is that I made a longer lecture yesterday about the principles, and I will share the link now to the attendees since it's online. I've also written about that concept of absolute possibility, which I call the creal for short, in the sense that we often speak about the real, but since this real as primum mobile here, to use an expression by Aristotle as first principle, or whether we think it is true or not, where it can be an ethical principle, it is pure multiplicity. However, and this I will not develop too much, but it's important to say that the question of the multiple and the one was very important for the Greeks, is this idea that on the one hand, yes, we realize that nature, physics, the creal, absolute possibility, it is infinitely multiple. But precisely from a logical point of view, whenever you posit the infinite multiple, you posit the other side of the coin, which is the one. So that's the relationship. And of course, I would take an entire lecture to enter into the relationships between the multiple and the one. But it is not a question for sophistics. It is a very political and present question. Of course, how do we have a world that is coherent, united, and yet diverse? And that's what the Greeks were already thinking.
Perfect. We have a question from Helen Selman. She's asking, today, are health decisions made more a function of medical advances or of society's vision of health?
So may you repeat that?
Of course. I am translating. Today, are health decisions made more a function of medical advances or of society's vision of health?
Right. So our medical advances, or our relation to
more a function of medical advances or of society's visions of health?
Right. And the first part of the question was?
Are health decisions made more function?
Yes, okay. Sorry.
No, yes, it's difficult to also, when they are not making the questions, it's difficult to know what they mean. So
right, and thanks for translating. So I mean, of course, we know that these decisions are enmeshed in a network of ideological, political, national reasons, and also biomedical reasons, in the sense that, for example, they might rely on statistics. One of the things that philosophy has been saying in the last decade is that we are dangerously becoming a world, and that's related to what I said about realism. We are becoming a world in which numbers are the ultimate element for decision. Sometimes presented candidly and sometimes presented ideologically as manipulation. It is almost as if, from the point of view of philosophical health, this world, the current world, should be diagnosed with arithmomania, which is in fact a disease, the disease of counting everything, the disease of thinking that if we have the numbers, if we have the statistics, if we can demonstrate with graphs, then we are going to take a right decision. And this reminds me of what Hegel said in his time. So in his time, there was this, the pseudoscience of phrenology, which looked at the brain and the size of the skull, etc., to infer a discourse about the character of people. Are they going to be criminal or not? And Hegel said, well, and this is valid for artificial intelligence today, for example, or for all the analytics and the based on numbers. He said, well, even if, and he didn't believe in phrenology, but even if phrenology was right at an instant A, this sort of inference based on data, well, the human being will take a decision tomorrow or now that will totally change and reshuffle this conclusions, this reification of what we think is happening. So I think we can transpose it today. I think that analytic thinking has to be rebalanced, not only with dialectic thinking, but also what I call crealectic thinking, which is related to this idea of philosophical health. And there again, I've written about that, and I don't think I have time here to expose the details.
Thank you very much, Luis. And thanks for all your explanations, all your answers, which were really clarified. And now we have to move on. We have to start with Paulina Rivero Weber. Paulina is a professor and has a PhD in philosophy from the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters of the UNAM. Her research focuses on ethics and bioethics, in particular of Spinoza, Nietzsche, Heidegger, and ancient Greek. She has become interested in philosophical hermeneutics, as well as to philosophy of culture and philosophy of religion. She has also been occupied by contemporary problems of bioethics, such as the ontological status of animal life. And we thank her very much because we know that in Mexico it's really early in the morning now, and she's making a big effort to be here. So thank you, Paulina, for joining us today, and you have the floor. Paulina, can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
I'm ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you turn on the camera, please?
Okay, I think. Okay.
Great.
I'm here. Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks to Susana Vidal and Eleonora Lamm and all the people who made this possible. And I'm going to speak about the relation between zoonosis and our way of life and the possibility to change it so we can live in a safer world. And let's begin by saying that zoonosis is a disease or infection naturally transmitted from animals to humans. There are direct and indirect zoonoses. In the first case, we are talking about zoonoses that are transmitted by direct contact, such as bites or saliva, etc. And indirect zoonosis transmission is carried out through an intermediary known as vector, which is usually also an animal. Currently, there are more than 200 types of zoonosis known. It's a very high quantity of diseases. It is estimated that of all epidemics, 70% are due to zoonosis. Not all of them are due to viruses, as is the case of the current pandemic, Zoonosis can be transmitted through various pathogens such as bacteria, fungi, parasites, or viruses. Many of these diseases are transmitted through the livestock industry. And when zoonosis is due to a bacteria, this industry presents an additional problem. Antibiotics are widely used in this industry and are subsequently ingested by humans. This has created strains of pathogens resistant to antibiotics in both animals and humans. And for these reasons, some doctors consider that an imminent threat are in the so-called superbacteria against which humans cannot defend ourselves. Therefore, the market where meat is sold can be a danger due to the large number of pathogens and may exist around them. The danger is even greater in wet markets, where live animals are butchered right there, and the urine, excrement, and the blood of animals create an unhealthy environment worth fearing. Another point of contact with zoonosis is due to the increasing urbanization and destruction of natural habitats, which increase contact with wild animals. All this should make us see that our approach and relationship with animals should be questioned. We are doing something wrong if the way we interact with animals causes 70% of the epidemics in the world. And indeed, we have learned to relate to them through an instrumental reason which assumes everything that exists as mere instruments for the service of something else. That is why we have seen animals as we would see something that is not really alive. A sample of this is found in a large part of the world's constitutions. Their laws protect people and property, but they do not speak of animals, which in the case of Mexico are not even considered in the main constitution as persons or as mere things. Not one thing, not the other, as if they didn't exist. There are 5 areas in which we can make a reflection on our relationship with them as pets, as researchers, as farm animals, as wild animals, and animals for entertainment. In the first case, it seems urgent to stop using the term pets, since it is a kind of accomplice in an unworthy treatment for animals. Several alternatives have been pointed out by different philosophers, among which we can choose to speak about it as companion animals or even companions. This new denomination seeks to give this being the respect, dignity, empathy, and care that every companion deserves. Regarding animals for research, the Hispanic philosopher Jesus Mosterin did consider that if only the indispensable experiments were carried out, they would be reduced to 4%, namely 96% of the experiments with animals in universities and experimentation centers are unnecessary. This is because many institutions all around the world simply repeat an experiment in order to express that they have corroborated it, which in most time is not even necessary. For wild animals, it is urgent to think, together with philosophers such as Nietzsche and Derrida, the importance of respecting those who are different. Everything that is different is not there to surprise us or for us to use. Each animal has a life that is its own. And it is an ethical obligation to respect the difference. Only in that way has it been possible to stand against racism, sexism, and now the so-called speciesism. Respect for the different should be one of the motivations for a new way of thinking about animality. About animals that are used for entertainment, we must realize not only that they live a miserable life of constant suffering, and at the same time, those entertainments generate considerable ethical damage in population. I mean, what does a child learn when he goes to a zoo? That it is lawful for us to take a life and remove an animal from its habitat or its family, just for us to see, just for us to know. With this way of thinking, they come to accept the torture of the animal until its death, just for fun. This kind of shows still exist in several Hispanic and American countries. And what about farm animals? Their lives, said Pacheris Singer, is an eternal Treblinka. This Nobel Prize winning writer lived himself through the horrors of the Jewish Holocaust and considered that farm animals are worse mistreated than the Jews in the Holocaust. From all that I have been saying today, it is easy to note that there are two types of obligations that we have toward animals. The direct obligations, which are those that we must have toward them because they themselves deserve them, and indirect obligations, which are those that we must have for them in order to take care of our own education or for the sake of the planet. Direct ethical obligations are based either on the respect that a thinking being deserves in a Kantian way, for which it is argued that animals are capable of thinking, or they can be based, these of direct obligations, they can be based on the fact that every animal is a sentient being. I mean, it feels not only physical pain, but also emotional pain, which is not only obvious, but also proven by biology. From my point of view, whether they think or not, no being with the capacity to feel pain and feel emotions should be mistreated. Regarding indirect or pragmatic obligations, caring for our own health should encourage us to change our relationship with animals, since, as we have seen, we compromise our health in the way we currently relate to them. But there is also an indirect obligation that cries out urgently, and it's the care of the planet. I will show you 3 slides. I hope I can share these slides with you. And they will show you the damage that farm animals do to the planet. Let me try to share my compartir. Okay, I think, are you looking at this slide now?
Yes, Paulina, we can see it clearly.
Okay, well, then you can see in this slide the land use per kilogram of food product. So land use is measured in meters squared per kilogram of given food product. Look at the bottom: apples, tomatoes, citrus, potatoes, banana. I mean, look at the bottom. We don't even need 1 meter. Now, look at the top. Lamb, mutton, beef, cheese. I mean, look at the numbers. Hundreds of meters. So this cannot be a good way of treating our planet. We are destroying the forest. We are destroying our whole planet just for some people, just to make some few people able to eat meat. Now, I want you to look at this other slide. These slides are from our World in Data from Oxford University. And here we can see the relation between the water that is used per kilogram of food product. And once again, look at cheese, lamb, mutton, prawns, beef, pig meat. So you have all these horrible, terrible numbers about water. And look at bananas, look at potatoes, tofu, citrus, chocolate, vegetables. It's completely absurd the way we are eating. We are destroying our planet. This is the last slide that I want you to look at. Greenhouse gases. Look at this. It's almost 30% due to this, the way we are eating, to the way we are eating. Look at land use of global habitable land. It's half of it, it's gone in agriculture. Now look at fresh water in the middle of the slide. 70% of global fresh water goes to agriculture, 20% to industry, and only, well, okay, 19% to industry, and only 11% to households. So almost all the fresh water we use is gone through agriculture. This is completely absurd. Now, look at eutrophications, and you have agriculture with that 70, I think it's 78%, and 22 for the global. I don't know if you have the meaning of this word is these rivers that are with a terrible contamination of chemicals that are going through agriculture, no? And this is the saddest point of all. Of 100% of the mammals biomass, excluding humans, livestock is 94% of the animals, and wild animals is only 6%. So what have we done to our world? What have we done to our world that, am I seen again? Did I stop sharing?
Yes,
the?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
So what have we done? I mean, how can we have 96% of the living animals in our planet in cages to eat them, and only 4% living free? It is evident that to have an ethical life and for a healthy planet, it is necessary to change just one idea. One idea can make the change, the whole change. The idea that we have of what an animal is. Every animal is a sentient being, said Charles Darwin in The Origin of Man, agreeing in this with Buddhism without even knowing it. As Philip Vollen has commented on Shakespeare, King Lear. Late at night on the cliffs, King Lear asked a blind man, "How do you see the world?" And the blind man replied, "I see it by feeling it, feeling it, feeling it." And shouldn't we all feel the world, I mean, sense the world, we must use our strengths as consumers and not buy any object that is harmful to the planet, because we have an ethical commitment. We are beings who have co-evolved with other animals. We do not own the planet. It does not belong to anyone, or in that case, it belongs equally to all of its beings. Only respect for life can give us a healthy way of living and for the rest of the planet. And that would be all for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Paulina, very much. Thanks a lot. You have enhanced the level of the debate with your thoughts. Thank you for enriching our debate with your ideas. Your speech was very significant and deep. Well, I invite the audience for questions. Well, first you can read the comments. They are congratulating you. They say that you're right, and they're thanking you. Anna Pellegrini.
I'm sorry, but you suddenly
to sacrifice our emotional, social, economic lives for the biological one.
Eleonora, in a moment you were like freeze, so I didn't listen to the whole question, sorry.
Well, I'm going to repeat it. Probably the connection is not working really well. Anna Pellegrini wants to ask you, she would like to ask if the pandemic has shown that death has become unacceptable for our modern societies, and that we are ready to sacrifice our emotional, social, economic lives for the biological one.
So if I am understanding the question, she's asking if this pandemic has shown us that we are ready to sacrifice our health as human beings. That's what she says.
Our emotional, social, and economical lives for the biological one.
Yes, well, this has been said, right? Well, I think that we can do it just for a while. I mean, if this was to be the way we are going to live for the rest of our lives, well, it would be very, very questionable to live a life in which you cannot live everything that makes life worth being, everything that makes life worth living, like hugging your children or your father or kissing your friends or whatever. So we have to sacrifice that kind of aspect. I do think so for our health. And I think it's worth doing it for a while. But if this is going to be the rest of it, well, I'd rather change our way of relating to animals. I mean, why should there be wet markets? And wet markets do not exist only in Wuhan. They exist in Mexico. They exist everywhere. I have seen wet markets in San Francisco, in the United States. I mean, why should we have wet markets? They should be completely forbidden. And if the University of Oxford is right in these slides that I showed you, well, we shouldn't eat meat. We are destroying the world by eating meat. So I think there are some things that we have to sacrifice if we want to keep on living a good life, and I mean an ethical life.
Here there is another question related to the first one. Angelo Giamareschi, please forgive me if I don't pronounce your surnames properly, but I'm doing my best. The questions are coming from all over the world, so probably I'm not pronouncing right. Well, Angelo is asking if, according with this animal ethical thought, what about the proliferation of petty dogs around the world?
Yes, of course. It was, do you remember these 5 columns that I showed you in the third slide? The last one, I think, no, almost the last one. I don't know how to say penultima.
The second one.
Aha, that one. that one would be that. So we are, yes, we are destroying our rivers. Well, first of all, we are destroying the earth itself. No? We are destroying also the rivers with this kind of chemicals. And we are destroying our own health. Because I mean, what I was talking about is, it can be also said about this issue. It's not only antibiotics, but also all the pesticides, all the chemicals stuff that goes into the food of these animals. Yes, I mean, I agree completely, and I think we should not eat meat.
And we have another question from Isabel. I'm translating it from French to English. Probably if I make a mistake, the interpreters can help me. She's asking if it's not in the human interest to get out of ternary cosmology, animal, man, God.
What, can you repeat the question for me, please?
Is it not in the human interest to get out of ternary cosmology?
Is it not in the human interest to
get out of ternary cosmology?
To get out of, I don't get it.
Let me see if I'm... ¿No es de interés humano salir de la cosmología ternaria? O sea, eso está preguntando en francés.
Well, you see, it's very interesting for me.
It refers to ternary cosmology in French. Probably the interpreters can help me with another word in English.
See, maybe we are talking about living this way of life in which we eat, right? Because it's very interesting to realize that at the beginning, in the Christianity, in the myths of Christianity, people wouldn't eat meat. So it's only later that this permission is given. It's a very strange part of the Bible, but I think that in not only in Occident but also in all parts of the world, people has been eating meat since long ago. But you know, it's not the same when you eat like if you have your little farm and you eat one animal or other and you nourish your family, than the industry that has, I think it's about 30 million. Well, we are humans are 7 million. I don't know how to say the number. It's so huge. 7,000 million people, right? So animals that are advocated for nourishing us are 30,000 millions. I mean, more than 4 parts. It's not the double, it's not triple, it's the 4, more than 4 parts of the number that humans are. So yes, I think that it would be great to live all this way of thinking and being and living and eating, which cosmology.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Paulina. We have one more question, and it's from Juan Camilo Barón Cifuentes. This is, I can pronounce it well because it's in Spanish. His question is, do you have a special reference to approach the state of the natural world patrimony and the necessary of the political dimensions of the social state? Maybe improving a special school methodic, or maybe try to control the anthropocentrism, because humans, we need the both states.
Humans, we need what?
The both states.
Eleonora, and what's the meaning of this last expression?
Do you want me to repeat the question again?
No, only the final expression. Humans, we need the...
Both. Los dos estados, both states.
Okay. Well, I have shown you some slides and that talk about the damage we are doing to the planet. I really think that we have many studies that show that we humans can live without eating meat with other kind of proteins. Is that what he meant? I think so, right? That's the meaning of the question. So I think there is a myth around that belief. I think that we have to change that way of thinking. I think that I know that it's very hard to see it. I know that is a very complex topic because it talks about the way we have been for more than centuries, since we are Homo sapiens. But I think that the point has come to, the world has come to a point in which rather we do it or we end up with the world. I would tell the audience to, there is a documental that is called Cowspiracy. I don't know if you know it. Cowspiracy, like cow, the English word for beef, no? Cow, vaca. Cowspiracy, and it also gives you the numbers. And there is also a book, La larga sombra del ganado, the large shadow of cattle, I think is the name. And I mean, just go inside this app of Oxford, Our World in Data, and you will find much more information than the little information I have been able to give you. Go inside this app, you will find everything, every data that you need to realize that we can have a new way of living. That's what I would answer.
Thank you very much, Paulina. So now I would like to, we are running out of time. We are coming to the end of this webinar, but previously I would like to give you 1 minute to each of you in order for you to tell us your final thoughts about this interesting roundtable that we had this morning. Bjorn, would you like to start? Just 1 minute, but I would like to hear you again with your final thoughts.
Thank you, Eleonora. It's we touched up on quite different topics. We covered quite a lot of ground. I think also the issues in the questions have been very interesting and highly relevant. One of the questions struck me as very important, and that was the question: what about the advances of science? Does that influence the issue of health? And I think certainly our conceptions of health direct in a way science and its advances, but at the same time, I think that our conceptions of health are influenced very much from the advances in science. And think just about treatment of asymptomatic hypertension, but also how we conceive of aging and some of the challenges that following from being able to intervene with regards to aging, how that will change our conception of health in the future.
Thank you, Bjorn. Thank you very much. Luis, we hear you.
Yes. So I would like to read a brief part of a talk I gave actually at UNESCO last year, where I was launching the idea of philosophical health. And this is taken from the movement I'm fostering that you can join on the site philosophical.health. So I'm quoting myself, which is not very humble, but philosophical health will be in the 21st century what physical and psychological health were in the 20th century. At the beginning of the century, it is a luxury for the happy few. By the end of the century, it is a necessity for all. Philosophical health is a state of fruitful coherence between a person's way of thinking and speaking and their ways of acting, such that the possibilities for a good life are increased and the needs for self and intersubjective flourishing satisfied. A philosophically healthy individual group or system or protocol ensures that the goals and purposes of the whole are pragmatically aligned with its highest ideals, while respecting the sustainable, plural, and creal future of the parties concerned by the processes at stake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really, really deep. Thank you. Thank you, really. Paulina, your final thoughts?
Well, it was very nice to be with you. It was very interesting for me. And well, my final thought would be that our health and the world's health can improve if we change our way of living, if we change particularly our way of feeding ourselves. And I think that to live an ethical life at this moment in this planet has to include many changes in our way of life, not only for humanity, but for humanity and for the rest of the planet.
Thank you, Paulina. Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of this roundtable. The participation of the experts has helped us enrich our debate. We feel very thankful and delighted. I listened to all your presentations with great interest, and I hope you all enjoyed them as much as I did. I would like to thank all our speakers on behalf of UNESCO, and as 2 hours is not enough, we invite you all to join us on the next roundtable entitled Fear, Confidence, Risk in Times of Pandemic at 2:30 p.m. Paris time. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. And well, this is until here.
Thanks, Eleonora.
Thanks to you, Luis. It's been really...
Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Paulina.
And thank you also from me.
Thank you, Bjorn. I hope to see you all again soon. See you, really.